got our start back in the 1980s. The inspiration came from playing concerts in Europe. And when both Dan and I had individually traveled to Europe to play concerts in various locations, it turns out that most of those concerts took place in historical buildings. And we were both playing historical instruments. We didn't do any of this touring together at the time, but we were playing with different groups in these historical buildings. So we were uniting the period instruments with the period architecture and the ambience of those buildings, along with the period music. And the combination of this experience of putting these three elements together was just magical for audiences. People really understood the music, they loved it, the overall concert experience was something that was very, very powerful. So after Dan and I had met in the late 1980s and gotten to know each other, we decided we wanted to try to create a similar concert experience for audiences here in New England and in Massachusetts. So we decided to begin a concert series where we would be uniting the period instruments with the ambience and acoustics of historical buildings in New England and doing the repertoire that was appropriate to the instruments that we play on.
Our experience in performing in these historic locations has been that we feel like it brings the music closer to our audiences. They feel like they're part of the musical period that the music came from. And also, since the size and the acoustical qualities of the historical spaces tend to be smaller and more intimate, it actually makes the experience of hearing the period instruments a lot more palpable for the audiences because they feel like they're closer to the performers and are more involved in the musical interpretation.
We made the very interesting discovery that the old Post Road, which was the original mail route from Boston to New York City, flourished from the 1680s through about the 1840s, which was exactly the period of music that we played, basically the Baroque time through the early Romantic. And it was this sort of flash of inspiration that, well, we'll find our historical buildings if we trace that original route from Boston through the state, across Massachusetts, and down to Connecticut and New York City. We'll find these incredible, beautiful buildings, and we'll be able to establish this concert series. So the ensemble actually first began as a concert series, and then we named ourselves after the Old Post Road because that was what we were doing. We were the musicians of the Old Post Road. I first became interested in learning Baroque flute when I was a student at Wellesley. When I came to Wellesley College, I learned that they had a Baroque flute in their instrument collection and that it was possible to take lessons on the instrument. And I was always very interested in Baroque music as a modern flutist, and I played a wide range of music as a modern flutist, everything from the Baroque through the contemporary eras. But the idea that there was actually an instrument that was different from the one that I had been playing on since I was a young child, that was actually used during the Baroque time, was intriguing to me. And so when I first had the opportunity to play that instrument, it's a wooden instrument as opposed to a silver instrument, and there's a beautiful resonant quality which is warm and is full of different character, quite different from a modern flute. I found that the repertoire from the Baroque time fits so beautifully on that instrument. It was very natural, and it's because that was the sound world that the composers had available. So when they wrote this repertoire that we play from the 18th century, it was the instruments from that time that was the sound world that they had available to them. So the music fits very, very well on these historical instruments.
Cello is quite an old instrument. It was probably made around 1700, and the feature of it that differs from modern cellos is that it has strings that are made out of gut rather than steel, so they give a much more kind of a silky and more complex overtone structure. They also speak in a very different way, so the types of articulation, the way the instrument speaks, is much more of a speaking voice rather than a singing voice. So it really goes well with the Baroque and early classical repertoire because the way the music was conceived was, I think, much more rhetorical than in later periods. I was drawn to this instrument because of its age and beauty and its suitability for the repertoire. It has a beautiful warmth to the sound that really, with a new instrument, is very, very hard to come by.
I enjoy playing early instruments very much, and I'm also incredibly fond of playing modern instruments. My sort of classical training is actually on the modern viola, and the Baroque violin is almost a lucky accident. It was something that came into my life around the time that I went to college, and just turned out to sort of blossom into an entirely new area of exploration. Dan and Suzanne are fantastic at putting programs together. They managed to combine things that people will sort of have in their ears with things that nobody has in their ears, and to put the whole collection of pieces, you know, things that are sort of coming out of these European libraries, together with things that are familiar, but the audience is going to get them in a totally new way because, you know, maybe they've heard the Pachelbel canon a million times, but they've heard the version that goes like this. Instead of the version that goes they managed to put these things together under the umbrella of a single concept, and that concept will usually link all the different elements of a program. So that's fascinating because it gives your mind this like three-dimensional structure to explore.
We perform music of what people would consider established composers, Bach, Mozart, Handel, Beethoven. But we also like to explore some of the lesser-known composers because they offer their unique voices to the repertoire of those periods that we're playing. So it's been really fun to actually rediscover and perform music that probably hasn't been performed for 200 or 300 years. And we find that each composer has their own unique musical language. And while the musical languages of the famous composers are well known to us and to audiences, we find that it actually takes a little bit of digging into the language of the lesser-known composers to find out really what they're trying to express. And so it's been a great musical challenge and great rewards.
We decided when we first started our concert series that we didn't want to just do our performances downtown Boston and Cambridge, but to also make use of the beautiful historical buildings in the suburbs and to bring our concert experience to people's backyards, of people who don't live in downtown Boston, but to make it as convenient as possible and to highlight some of the beautiful architectural treasures across the state. So in addition to our concert series that takes place in historical venues along the old Boston Post Road, the group also does outreach performances for children in inner city schools in Boston. And the group also tours. We do performances for other presenters. The group has traveled to Europe for festivals in Europe as well as to Mexico for festivals in Mexico. And we enjoy playing for audiences wherever they're interested in hearing what we do.